Okay, so for week 7, we're going to continue a bit on morphology and more on etymology, um, and integrate into that or um, add to it English language history, and then just a small crash course on computational linguistics. Um, and so this week is kind of like a, you know, there's it's a kind of catch your breath week. I'm sorry about the grammar week was a lot. Grammar and syntax was a lot. Phonetics, phonology, grammar and syntax, um, even morphology. It's a considerable amount of work. This week should be fairly low key, catch up week. So um, I'm going to I haven't this is unfinished because I have to make the video and then put the video in there, and I'll put the video the week there. Those are graded. Should be some easy points, should key you into what you need to know for the class, going through to the midterm and then the final, so that you're not having to guess. There really are 4 assignments. Where did English come from? How did English evolve? The history of English brief, and English word roots and derivation exercises. That's where the etymology and morphology kind of come in, because they are connected. And the crash course computational linguistics. As always, I do have the course objectives. The course objectives really just mention the sub areas of or subfields of linguistics. That includes morphology and morphological analysis and being able to look at the English language, right? Architectural elements. Every language has different types of morphology. English, like when you look at inflections, English is really, it used to have a lot of inflections in the English language. If you look at Old English, it doesn't anymore, right? It really doesn't. Um, Before I go here, what I'm going to do actually is take you to um, the quizzes, because um, so that opens next month, the 10th. Well, depending, I'm going to use this video again, so it won't be the 10th necessarily. Um, Next semester. But so, question: the form of English learned before 1100 or used before 1100. So people will, maybe because of like old English letters and tattooing that were popularized really in the Pachuco and Cholo kind of era, and a lot of other people took from that style. That's not, the you know, um, typography of scripts and how they use them in the contemporary way is not. That's not the history of English. So you have the form of Old English before 1100. In 1066, William the Conqueror came to England to try to claim the throne, and he defeated Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings, and he ushered in the reign of the Norman French. Um, and so you have, if you look at the history of England, you had indigenous people who were of Celtic descent, the Britons. That's who, Caesar, when he tried to go and 2,000 years ago, 2040, he was murdered in 44 BC, assassinated, I believe. Like, originally there were Celtic people in Britain. The Romans came. Caesar didn't really establish a presence. That was mostly under Claudius. Um, and they influenced, and they didn't establish there. And there was a pagan and then a Christian presence. And then, um, you know, they withdrew with the collapse of the Roman Empire, which was kind of who was running it changed into Germanic people. But nonetheless, they kind of withdrew. And that's where period with the Arthurian legends. Then what happens is you have different invasions of England, including by the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, who were Germanic people, meaning they spoke a Germanic language. Um, other meanings of that are a whole different thing. And so you have, you know, Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, Angles, England, right? But you have this, if you look at power structures in the United States, for example, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, people like Jefferson and lots of American leaders in powerful families, consider themselves to be descended from the Anglos and the Saxons, the WASP, not the Normans, which is also, it's all a lot of history and origin stories are very dubious. Anywho, um, so um, if you read English literature, if you read, Ivanhoe, and there's this tension between the Saxons, and there's a good salt of the earthish people and the bad Normans who are, I mean, the Normans, it's Normandy is Northmandy, basically, the people you could call Vikings, you know, who who invaded invaded France, and the French eventually gave them, including Count Rollo, Normandy, and they had a claim to the throne of England, whether dubious or not. They invaded, and there's a whole bunch of history there. Um, I mean, there were also other Viking type people who started invading in the 8th century in England, and they did influence the, there are very few remnants of Celtic language in English. The Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes kind of dominated stuff. And so it was a Germanic language. And that Germanic language was related to really the Danes and other Nordic people who came. I mean, the Norse languages are very close, and it influenced English. And then you have these former Northmen, Normans invading England, 1066, Battle of Hastings, and then all the ruling class were French-speaking people of Viking descent, Viking. And so you have Old English, right? Beowulf is in Old English. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicles are in Old English. And then you have what they call Middle English, which develops with the ruling class speaking French. And, the lower, it starts, eventually the language starts changing, and you could kind of recognize Middle English, right? So they say between 1100 and 66, really, after the conquest, eventually the ruling class, and they start to influence. So you have a Middle English until they say roughly 1500. Now, if you start listening to English 1500s, this is the time of Henry VIII, right? You can start, the guy who uh, killed off a lot of his wives and stuff like that, right? See at Renaissance fairs. Um, you can understand it. I mean, it's really early modern English, and he's in early mid 1500s. So, but if you listen to something from the 13 or 1400s, it's hard. You can start to get it. It's like more recognizable than Old English, but it's still different. And then between 1500 and 1700, they call it early modern English. So some people will say, "Oh, Old English like Shakespeare." No, no, no. Shakespeare's not Old English. It's technically early modern English. Now, you go a decade or two and you start using slang and stuff like that from a few decades or whatever. I can use slang from the 80s and 90s, and people will not know what I'm talking about. And, you go hundreds of years, and like, words change and all these other things happen. So, yeah, it's Shakespeare's hard. So you got early modern English, 1500 to 1700, and then 1700 you have what you call modern English. Um, so I do on the Kahoot have some things on that. Um, there's little videos on the quiz, and I don't know if you can watch all of them, because I do kind of like sample. I give you samples of each of those kind of languages, all those languages, each of those kind of stages in the English language. And I think it's really unfortunate. One of the reasons I include this, now it's just kind of to integrate some of the ideas of, like, when we're looking at phonetics and phonology and morphology, you can kind of see how some of these fit into the English language and its history. And whole video here. 1 second. I gotta enable the share computer sound. Sorry. So this is Old English. This is Beowulf. I love the poem. It's so amazing. It's get a good translation. There's a great or Irish poet, Seamus Heaney, who did a translation of it, and it flows in English. He has this gift for English that just it flows.
Ninga thrum je frunnen, who that the lingas ellen fremedon, oft chill shaving shallen a threatum, monium maigdum, mere settle oft there, eis or a airlas, sid an airest wert, fair shaft funden, he das frauwerie bad works under wolknum, wert men.
So, look up Old English, and you're going to see, wow, you really can't understand much of it. And so, you know, I won't put too much here, but it's really interesting and really rich. And these were oral poems. They were written hundreds of years later. These all these peoples had oral traditions, and Western people now think everything has to be in writing. Well, the oral tradition was always higher in a lot of ways. I mean, it was. I'm not saying it's always higher, but the performance, the ability of somebody to be eloquent, the learning of rhetoric, it's something that has much been diminished, even in American history. It used to be so important. Okay, so after William the Fat Bastard, that's another name for him, William the Conqueror.
What we gardena in yer dagum, thaid keninga
Sorry, that's him again. Middle English.
One that April with his shore soda, the drocht of March, hath pierced to the road, and bathed every vine in sweet liquor.
You see how close it is? Like if you said liquor, liquid, this is a word choice thing. But almost all the words are the same. So you could kind of make out Middle English. This is the English of Geoffrey Chaucer, of the Canterbury Tales. Right? The great English poet. Which is pretty weird. I mean, yeah, he died in 1400, so easy date to remember. But that's Middle English. That's like it goes from really it's mostly you can't understand in Old English to Middle English, and then it goes to early modern, etc.
Of wit virtue engendered is the floor. One Zephyrus egg with his sweat.
So that's from the Canterbury Tales. That's Geoffrey Chaucer. That's Middle English, 1100 to about 1500. Not accurate, like that at all. But and so here I got a picture of Henry VIII. Here's early modern English.
Pastime in good company, a love and shall until a day. Grotja who lust but none deny, so God be pleased thus live will I. For me pastance, hunt, sing and dance, may art is set, all goodly sport for me.
So that's supposed to be Henry VIII. You see guys looking like that in every Renaissance fair you go to, if you go to those. The problem with that is it sounds, because they're doing accurate kind of pronunciation, it sounds more archaic and different than it really does. It really, if you look at it written down, and you can dope it out, man. You can figure it out. It's okay. So you need to know those 3 and 4 time periods for the quiz. And so there are no questions about on you can always go to just the modules here. You can just go to modules and weeks if you like, however you want to navigate this. I'm trying to provide multiple means in the hope it doesn't confuse people and makes it easier. I am aware that it may be the opposite, like you have too much stuff. And you're like, oh, I apologize for that. I'm going to work on streamlining it to make it easier. If you ever have questions, just hit me up. So, where did English come from? How did English evolve? Right. Create an outline of the history of English, history of English, oh my gosh, when I did that. Using the videos and other sources. I mean, you can use other sources, do some research. But yeah, there's going to be some basic questions, history of the English on the midterm and the final. You just saw that, right? You need to know 4 questions so far. Before 1100, it's Old English. 1100 to 1500, it's Middle English. First one is, Beowulf or the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. There's all kinds of really cool stuff you can hear in Old English. Middle English, the most famous example is Geoffrey Chaucer and his Canterbury Tales. For your English major, you'll have to read it. I found it as a historical record and preserves kind of the vulgarity of some of the. I mean, there's all kinds of really kind of the Italian. A lot of people did that. A lot of vulgar stuff. Some of it's like racist or anti-Semitic. It's not. I don't know. It's not the same as racism because modern racism starts with the colonization, really, of African Americas or Americas in Africa. But there is anti-Semitism, which is ideological more than racial. And some other things that are pretty bit. They're a trip. I mean, also against Muslims. Okay, so where did English come from? So this is a really good. This is a TED Ed kind of one, right? I believe, and it's opening really slow.
And we're back. The ticking down the barrel of a 4:55 meeting.
Okay, now it mutes, and I want to skip. So, TED Ed.
When we talk
TED
about
Ed is cool because it usually has questions, answers, research, a whole bunch of other stuff. I think this might just be the YouTube one, but you can go to the actual TED Ed site and it will have a whole bunch of other information. I'm saying that also if you want to, make lessons eventually.
English, we often think of it as a single language. But what do the dialects spoken in dozens of countries around the world have in common with each other, or with the writings of Chaucer? And how are any of them related to the strange words in Beowulf? The answer is that, like most languages, English has evolved through generations of speakers, undergoing major changes over time. By undoing these changes, we can trace the language from the present day back to its ancient roots. While modern English shares many similar words with Latin-derived Romance languages like French and Spanish, most of those words were not originally part of it. Instead, they started coming into the language with the Norman invasion of England in 1066. When the French-speaking Normans conquered England and became its ruling class, they brought their speech with them, adding a massive amount of French and Latin vocabulary to the English language previously spoken there. Today, we call that language Old English. This is the language of Beowulf. It probably doesn't look very familiar, but it might be more recognizable if you know some German. That's because Old English belongs to the Germanic language family.
So, it's really, I find this a very interesting kind of area of study, and I love it. And I study a lot of the history and read history and historical fiction, and I go back and when you look at how word history, look at etymology, right, or how words are broken down, morphology, little pieces with meaning. You have to have if the more you understand where all these sources, Latin, Greek, French, German, and then so many in later, especially borrowing, as English really becomes this language of empire, and spreads to all over the world, the empire upon which the sun never set. So I really feel it's important to include
This is a public student announcement.
include a history of English in the class, and let's see. Just keep ideas. I'll go.
I'm going to start with a challenge. I want you to imagine each of these 2 scenes in as much detail as you can. Scene number 1. They gave us a hearty welcome. Well, who are the people who are giving a hearty welcome? What are they wearing? What are they drinking? Okay, scene 2. They gave us a cordial reception. How are these people standing? What expressions are on their faces? What are they wearing and drinking? Fix these pictures in your mind's eye, and then jot down a sentence or two to describe them. We'll come back to them later. Now on to our story. In the year 400 CE, the Celts in Britain were ruled by Romans. This had one benefit for the Celts. The Romans protected them from the barbarian Saxon tribes of Northern Europe.
So again, a lot of stuff I'm talking about, right? And what they're going to do with that is they're going to kind of look at, they gave us a hearty welcome, they gave us a cordial reception, and show how the hearty welcome is very good old Anglo-Saxon words, old English, from English roots, while a cordial reception is actually from French. It's actually from French is a Romance language coming from the Romans, not romance, love, stuff like that, but coming from the Romans. And so, that was the more formal language, right? Because of the ruling of the ruling class of the Normans who were speaking the French. So there's really, so this is a really cool kind of funny series. The third one, the history of English in 10 minutes, and it's not 10 minutes, it's 13. But I miss teaching this in person, I swear.
The history of English in 10 minutes. Chapter 1, Anglo-Saxon, or whatever happened to the Jutes. The English language begins with the phrase, "Up yours, Caesar," as the Romans leave Britain, and a lot of Germanic tribes start flooding in. Tribes such as the Angles and the Saxons, who together gave us the term Anglo-Saxon, and the Jutes, who didn't. The Romans left some very straight roads behind, but not much of their Latin language. The Anglo-Saxon vocab was much more useful, as it was mainly words for simple everyday things like house, woman, loaf, and werewolf. 4 of our days of the week were named in honor of Anglo-Saxon gods. They didn't bother with Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, as they'd all gone off for a long weekend. While they were away, Christian missionaries stole in, bringing with them leaflets about jumble sales and more Latin. Christianity was a hit with the locals and made them much happy to take on funky new words from Latin like martyr, bishop, and font. Along came the Vikings, with their action man words like drag, ransack, thrust, and die. They may have raped and pillaged, but they were also into give and take. 2 of around 2,000 words they gave English, as well as the phrase, "Watch out for that man with the enormous axe." Chapter 2, The Norman Conquest, or Excuse My English. 1066. True to his name, William the Conqueror invades England, bringing new concepts from a...
There's that video. It should just be one video. I think I posted it twice. Sorry. So this is really cool if you can, do this, learn from it, remember it. It gives you understanding of the language that you're speaking and actually can help you kind of teach about it. So this is, I will revisit this when we look at language history, world languages, and things like that. But for this post, is it carry over the first one? Take notes and define the distinct periods in the history of the English language, right? And you got to have Old English, Middle English, and Modern English. If you do Early Modern, I don't really care, but at least those 3 time periods. 2, what did you learn about the history of the English language? How is this helpful to you, especially if you're going to become a teacher, but also relative to all the aspects of linguistics that we have studied this far, or we will study, right? And then respond to a peer's post, kind of looking at what did they learn? How does it compare to what you learned? Things like that. And if you want to, and I need to include this, but if you want to, for your peer response, I'm going to start saying you can always respond in video if you want. It might make things easier, and it would make it more interesting too. So this is the video. Now there is
of Chaucer. And how are any of them related to the strange...
This is actually the same video that we had in the other one, but I'm just asking you to do another thing. So it is a kind of carryover, but it's a reflective exercise. Now here is an entire book on, and sometimes I'm like, I wish I could just take 2 weeks and just do English language and stuff. But so in this book, if you look here, Old English, Middle English, Early Modern English, right? There's a lot and a lot more depth. She, like any wise person, and I will have you revisit this. You'll be looking at the history of English, not just in England, but also in America, and the dialects and how they kind of spread in America. But this gives you a really in-depth kind of look at the history of Old English, right? 55 BC, documented Roman invasion that was under the leadership of Julius Caesar. But they didn't really establish much until Claudius, but which was much later. Well, anyway, Roman withdrawal, right? And Cadman's hymn, Beowulf. That's when it's written down. That one, and then English conquest, and it's a pretty cool thing, I don't know if any of you guys watch Vikings. There's a lot of problems with history in Vikings, but it covers some of this. Or if you watch The Last Kingdom, I read all the books up till about 4 years ago from The Last Kingdom from Bernard Cornwell, Cornwell, great English historical fiction writer, and he writes about the time of Alfred the Great, among other things, the runes, and there's some great stuff here. If you're interested in this, so that's a whole book on it, the Bayeux Tapestry and about the Roman, the Roman West. Okay, so next thing is English word roots and derivations exercise. So all you have to do for this is, I would love to require more in this, but there is and this used to be more open and have more. There used to be it used to have a really nice display, but I think they make you pay, where they had word trees, and they literally had these images of trees and then clickable word roots, morphology, and they would break down words according to the roots and their history, which is etymology. And so basically, here's the root cast. So fort, make your vocabulary strong. Latin root fort means strong. So fortify, forte, effort, comfort. That's a trip, right? Those kind of things. Would you thought of that? So they have a little podcast on the word root and its derivations, right? And they have a list of some of the derivations. Fort, a strong building. Fortress, a strong building. Fortification, again, a strong building. Effort, putting in strong work. Reinforce, to make strong. Forceful, full of strength. Force, a strong power. Fortify, to make strong. Comfortable. Discomfort. Fortitude. Comfort. Pianoforte. I'm not sure I said that right. I have to forte. I say that because I would check Merriam-Webster. Fortissimo, fortified, forte, right? So I have this, right? I give you an explanation of the root, and then they have a podcast 3 minutes. And usually
the Latin root fort means strong. Today we will endeavor to strengthen your vocabulary using minimal effort.
This is Word Root of the Day, brought to you by Membean. That's how strong I
love you. People have built forts since civilizations have been around to be a strong defense against invading enemies. Such fortresses, or fortifications, are built with strong walls so as to keep people safe within. Fort Knox, for instance, is a strong building keeping the United States' supply of gold protected. Building fortresses requires a lot of effort or strong exertion from their builders. Sometimes fortifications have to be reinforced or made strong again if the walls have been weakened after a forceful or strong attack. And of course, the Force in Star Wars makes its successful users strong beyond belief. Breakfast cereals and other processed foods are often fortified with vitamins, making their nutritional value stronger. These extra vitamins hopefully make the consumer's body comfortable or thoroughly strong so as to avoid discomfort or being apart from feeling strong. A great deal of fortitude or strength of character is needed to deal with uncomfortable health problems, so it's best to get enough vitamins to ward off sickness or disease. We all seek bodily comfort or a thorough feeling of strength over that of debilitating weakness. Did you know that the word piano is short for pianoforte? The word piano refers to a soft sound, and forte is a strong or loud sound. The pianoforte was the first keyboard instrument which had a range of volume. Earlier harpsichords only had one volume. And regarding strength of sound, the F on a sheet of music stands for forte, which directs the musician to play the piece with a strong or loud sound. And FF indicates fortissimo, or playing with a very strong or loud sound. Our minds have now been fortified with numerous examples of the root fort, which should make our knowledge of those words' definitions effortless to recall, as they are now a forte or strong point.
If you want to build a great vocabulary, head over to membean.com, where roots are just one of many different ways to learn words.
They really have, I don't know why they changed it except that they made it for like a pay thing, but I was using it before without the pay thing, where you really could, it was clickable, it had images, and so I put 2 links, and this one has, they don't have the images, unfortunately. Now this is it's a quick exercise. You can do it really quick, but I would prefer, so anim, right? Mind or spirit, right? Animated, animal, inanimate, animation, animator. And then, write down 5 words and their derivations. I want you to do it for sect, cult, pater, mater, anim, and dur. And I did anim for you. But, I also hope that you'll revisit this and you'll explore it, right? Because you can learn a lot. English word roots and derivations, man. It's really kind of tell you, if you want to really increase your vocabulary, this is one way to do it, right? Start to understand the word roots and derivations and really help, learners as well. I included this here. It's not really related. It's not necessarily put as part of the curriculum on course objectives, but I will just tell you, this isn't necessarily that viable of an option for most people in linguistics when I did my program and I got my master's in '96. But 2 big areas, there's a lot of areas in linguistics that have expanded a lot, but the ones that have expanded the most, I would say, are neuroscience and neurolinguistics and computational linguistics, especially in relation to artificial intelligence. And there are a lot of jobs in computational linguistics if you're interested in it. So I want to at least mention it. And it's not that I'm not going to test you on it or anything like that, but I just want to mention it.
I'm Taylor, and welcome to Crash Course Linguistics. Computers are pretty great, but they can only do stuff that humans tell them to do. Counterintuitively, this means that the more automatic a human skill is, the more difficult it is for us to teach to computers. It's easy for us to teach a computer to calculate millions of digits of pi or play chess, but get a computer to recognize which image contains a traffic light? surprisingly difficult. The same thing goes for language. The parts that are difficult for humans, like learning lots of new words, are easy for computers. And the parts that are easy for humans, like understanding across typos and accents, or knowing if someone's sad or angry or joking, are really, really difficult for machines. Plus, language isn't just one task to teach. It's all the different things we've talked about throughout the series and more. Programming computers to process human language is called natural language processing, or computational linguistics. We rely on NLP for a whole range of tasks: search engines, voice-activated home systems, spam filters, spell checkers, predictive text, and more. Today we'll look at what NLP is and what makes language a difficult challenge for computers.
So again, like so many other things, I can only just kind of introduce the topic and scratch the surface, but there's entire books, I mean, not just on this subject, but all kinds of related subjects, right? Because you're looking at, not just how do you get things to work, but then what are those things doing to us as citizens, as consumers, when, I mean, whatever can take your FaceTime on this, right? I mean, they have psychologists as well as marketers and all kinds of other people to make sure that you watch The Social Dilemma. When it's a few years old, but watch that doc or read some of the books on surveillance capitalism. I mean, and how Google and Meta and all these companies make all their money by data mining us when we're thinking we're getting something for free. Anyway, if you're interested in all those things, that's a giant place to, and really there is kind of a lot of connections with other areas of linguistics through that. So this week's kind of like, it's connecting other things, and most things in linguistics, I mean, they can stand on their own, but then they're connected to other things because language doesn't take like a place in a vacuum. Okay, so that's week 7. I will see you for next week's recording.